So this right here that I'm about to share with you is super powerful, man. There's a young Iraq War veteran who passed away, and he wrote his last letter to George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. And man, he really laid it all out there for them. He laid it all out there. He torches Bush and Cheney in his dying letter. So this is the guy right here. His name is Thomas Young. I think that's his wife with him here. Let me read the letter to you, and you'll see. Thomas addressed his last letter to former President George W. Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney. Thomas was close to death and wanted to speak out forcefully before he passed away. Thomas Young joined the Army 2 days after September 11, 2001, and he was shot and paralyzed after serving only 5 days in Iraq in 2004. He was the subject of the powerful 2007 documentary Body of War, with a soundtrack that included Pearl Jam, Rage Against the Machine, and Bruce Springsteen, and since then his health has worsened and he is currently under hospice care. Here's the last letter. To George W. Bush and Dick Cheney from Thomas Young. I write this letter on the 10th anniversary of the Iraq War on behalf of my fellow Iraq War veterans. I write this letter on behalf of the 4,488 soldiers and Marines who died in Iraq. I write this letter on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of veterans who have been wounded and on behalf of those whose wounds, physical and psychological, have destroyed their lives. I am one of those gravely wounded. I was paralyzed in an insurgent ambush in 2004 in Sadr City. My life is coming to an end. I'm living under hospice care. I write this letter on behalf of husbands and wives who have lost spouses, on behalf of children who have lost a parent, on behalf of the fathers and mothers who have lost sons and daughters, and on behalf of those who care for the many thousands of my fellow veterans who have brain injuries. I write this letter on behalf of those veterans whose trauma and self-revulsion for what they have witnessed, endured, and done in Iraq have led to suicide, and on behalf of the active duty soldiers and Marines who commit, on average, a suicide a day. I write this letter on behalf of the some 1 million Iraqi dead, and on behalf of the countless Iraqi wounded. I write this letter on behalf of us all, the human detritus your war has left behind, those who will spend their lives in unending pain and grief. I write this letter, my last letter, to you, Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney. I write not because I think you grasp the terrible human and moral consequences of your lies, manipulation, and thirst for wealth and power. I write this letter because before my own death, I want to make it clear that I and hundreds of thousands of my fellow veterans, along with millions of my fellow citizens, along with hundreds of millions more in Iraq and the Middle East, know fully who you are and what you have done. You may evade justice, but in our eyes, you are each guilty of egregious war crimes, of plunder, and finally, of murder, including the murder of thousands of young Americans, my fellow veterans, whose future you stole. Your position of authority, your millions of dollars of personal wealth, your public relations consultants, your privilege and your power cannot mask the hollowness of your character. You sent us to fight and die in Iraq after you, Mr. Cheney, dodged the draft in Vietnam, and you, Mr. Bush, went AWOL from your National Guard unit. Your cowardice and selfishness were established decades ago. You were not willing to risk yourselves for our nation, but you sent hundreds of thousands of young men and women to be sacrificed in a senseless war with no more thought than it takes to put out the garbage. He says he joined 2 days after the 9/11 attack. I joined the Army because our country had been attacked. And he goes on to point out the geopolitical realities. It installed a brutal and corrupt pro-Iranian government in Baghdad, one cemented in power through the use of torture, death squads, and terror, and it has left Iran as the dominant force in the region on every level, moral, strategic, military, and economic. Iraq was a failure, and it was you, Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney, who started this war. It is you who should pay the consequences. I won't go through the whole thing here, but it's a deep level. It's a deep letter, and it's touching on many levels, and it really exposes what the reality of the situation was and how our soldiers are some of the first ones that woke up to it. Mike Preisner also comes to mind. That's the husband of Abby Martin, and he was part of the War on Terror, and he had a massive awakening moment, and he came to realize, hold on now. In this instance, I'm the terrorist. I'm the baddie. I'm the one doing things that are unacceptable, that cross a line, that violate international law. And as I always point out to you guys, when you look at the anti-Vietnam War protests, Eventually, everybody came to realize, of course, the anti-Vietnam War protesters were right. Well, at the time, they were smeared relentlessly, and they were called the bad guys. Same with the anti-Iraq War protesters. They were smeared every single day and night. Fox News would rake them over the coals on a regular basis. They'd be called pro-terrorist, pro-Saddam, everything under the sun. They hate the troops. This is what they were told all the time. And then now, in retrospect, it's now the duh position, even among Republican voters and Republican politicians like Donald Trump. It's the duh position to say, shouldn't have done that war. Let's keep that in mind for today because of what we're witnessing in Gaza. We see how the pro-Palestine protesters are the ones being smeared. We see how the ones who are criticizing Israel are being smeared. But in a decade or two, maybe less than that, eventually everybody's going to be like, well, of course, those protesters were right. Of course, they were right to stand against the genocide and ethnic cleansing. And this letter should be a good reminder of that. And also, it should be a good reminder that international law has to matter. That Bush and Cheney should be locked up for their crimes, their various crimes. That Netanyahu should absolutely be locked up for his crimes. And that we either have rule of law or we don't. We have justice or we don't. And I don't want to live in a world where it's the wild, wild west and might makes right. But that's the world that the ruling class wants us to live in because they don't want to have any accountability for what they've done. You got to give a tremendous amount of credit to Thomas Young for standing up, writing this last letter to George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, and really putting them on blast and letting them know, we see you. We know what you are. And we want you to be in a cage the rest of your life. But if you're not, we hope you live with daily pain and regret. And you're haunted by the ghosts of your decisions because these are historic atrocities that they did. All right, guys, that's the show. I love you all very much. Thank you for listening to the show. Everybody, do me a big favor, subscribe to the channel. That helps out massively, costs you nothing. You could support the show on Patreon as well, or you could tip through YouTube. Never talk to an advertiser. And so you guys fund this show from the ground up. And I'll be back tomorrow, guys. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I will see you then. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.